to insights Kathleen and Rhonda bring that are essential for all who seek to serve as salt and light in a broken world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bev. That was awfully kind of you. I'm going to say just a couple of more words about our co-presenter, my co-presenter, Rhonda. I've known Rhonda, you'll have to correct me, but I think it's been about 10 or 15 years. And she's a totally wonderfully competent director of adoptions who then moved to consulting and who now does hospice work. And I just want to say she's my friend and my mentor, and she's been my patient teacher for so long. I actually call her boss. So when I talk to her on the phone, I say, hi, boss, and she says, hi, Dr. B. So she's also my partner in faith. When we have gone out and done consultation with states and tribes about their foster care and adoption systems, we've had wonderful discussions about God, about our neighbor, about how to be better people. And she's really been a great spiritual, not only partner, but a spiritual guide to me. And she loves God and she loves her neighbor so much that she agreed to help us out today. So I just wanted to say how much I'm grateful to you, Rhonda. So, okay, so what we're going to do here now is, this is a presentation about ethics, but we're not actually going to go down all the ethical principles or the standards, because every single thing about this presentation, everything about race, hits the entire social work code of ethics. The ethical principles of justice, dignity and worth of the person, integrity, trustworthiness, competence. Race is ingrained in every single piece of them. So I wanted to call your attention to NASW actually is committed to ending racism through public education, social justice, advocacy, training, and you can find their statement on race and their work on race equity at the NASW site. But our own organization, the Catholic Social Work National Association, is also committed to ending racism. And you can find on the CSWNA website, racism is a sin that divides the human family, blots out the image of God among specific members of that family, and it violates the fundamental human dignity of those called to be children of the same Father. And that's from Brothers and Sisters to Us, and that's the U.S. Bishop's pastoral letter on racism. So you can find all this at CSWNA's website. So here's exactly what we're going to cover today, and we're going to try and do it quickly. I do want to advise you the PowerPoint is larger than what we're going to talk about because we wanted to include some data for you that you might look at later on. We just don't have the time to cover in 1 hour the entire
Kathleen, we are not able to see your PowerPoint at this time. I just wanted you to be aware of that.
Oh, no. So
please join webinar. So you have one picture up, and so just wanted you to be.
Thank you let me see if I can share my screen. How do you share your screen here?
I think it is your screen that you're sharing. You just have a different screen up. So it says join webinar. So, we can see that you're pushing on something. So stop share.
My screen has the entire PowerPoint up. Do you want to put it up from yours? Because I sent it to you all, if you'd rather. So there's my webcam. Hello?
I'm Kathleen.
Yep.
I'm not able to share, so let me see what I can do.
Let's see where microphone. I can see so my screen actually shows it. What do you see from my screen, by the way?
All I see is join webinar. So you have that above. So if you could stop share and then share again on the PowerPoint, that's probably what happened.
I'm sorry. Stop sharing my webcam. Okay.
not your webcam, but your screen. Or I've suggested to Kathleen from CSWNA if she could share your PowerPoint, as do not have the ability. So,
Kathleen, can you do it?
she's going to try.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry I stepped away from the phone a minute, or the thing a minute I had on a phone call. So what's the issue?
We do not. She's able to show her screen. Just join webinar. So
Have you clicked the little icon? The camera icon?
Yeah, the camera icon is on, but it's showing me, not the screen. Hold on.
Okay, try that. Can you try sharing your screen again?
How about this? Now that you've made me the presenter, it allows me to.
Yeah, you were the presenter before, so I don't know why it didn't do that. There we go.
There we go. Hey, this is working. See, we're so good.
Now is it showing?
I apologize.
Is the PowerPoint showing now?
Yeah. Go ahead, Kathleen. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is what we're going to cover. So it's showing now, right? Okay, so this is what we're going to cover. What does Catholicism say about racism? What are some of the racist experiences in everyday life for people of color? What is white privilege? What is structural and institutional racism? Does structural or institutional racism exist in my agency? And how am I personally responsible? So we go from the broadest area of what is Catholicism, what's personal experiences, what's structural,
Thank you.
down to what we can do. So that's what we're going to cover. So Catholic teachings on racism, of course, go back to the time of Christ. Everything in the Bible talks about how each person is so valuable. And St. Paul says, through faith, you are all children of God in Christ. So, of course, we all know that racism is not. Each person is a child of God. And Christ said that numerous times. So, of course, the Catholic stance goes back to Jesus Christ. In the 1400s, it's so interesting to me when I started looking at this, that Pope Eugene IV, he condemned the enslavement of African Christians in the Canary Islands. So we first start seeing these statements, papal statements about racism. Just 30 years after that, Pope Sixtus IV actually excommunicated people who were aiding transporting people to be sold into slavery. Then, just 70 years after that, Pope Paul III condemned racist ideology. And I really want to call your attention to this, because the racist ideology was that certain people were subhuman as opposed to being human. And that's where this stems from. And he said right off the bat, you cannot think like that. All people are human beings. And Rhonda will talk a little bit about that later on. Then in 1839, Pope Gregory VI condemned racism and forbade Christians from participating. Then we get into just before World War II, Pope Pius XI condemned the Nazi government ideas about race and blood, just the ideas that people there's a superior race. 2 years after that, Pope Pius XII condemned racist ideologies, and in fact called them poison, and because that's what they are, they're poison. Blessed Pope Paul VI, St. Pope John Paul II, Pope Francis, they all have written many letters, documents, encyclicals that condemn racism and racist ideology. And then in 1988, the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace condemned all racism, racist ideology, and racist acts. So all of that, Catholicism, it really has always, for a long time, come out against racism. And you can see here the USCCB committee, they have an ad hoc committee against racism. And if you go to that, to their ad hoc committee, you can see statements, letters, educational resources, parish resources, videos, articles. So find that site, and there are tons of resources for you available there. I do want to read this quote, if I could. Racism still profoundly affects our culture, and it has no place in the Christian heart. This evil causes great harm to its victims, and it corrupts the souls of those who harbor racist or prejudicial thoughts. The persistence of the evil of racism is why we are writing this letter now. And that comes from Open Wide Our Hearts. And I, again, suggest you go to this site for their resources. So I'm going to turn this over to Rhonda because she can tell you quite a bit about the life experiences of persons of color and white privilege.
So first, I'd like to thank Dr. B for the introduction. And I'm honored to be here with you today in talking about this very important subject. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, good. Okay, so because racism exists in our every culture, it is imperative the Black parents, the Black children are raised in a way to understand that they are going to be treated differently because of the color of their skin. And if you've talked to Black parents, you may have heard them talking about the talk. And that's a very necessary part of Black parenting. It's not just one talk at one time, but it's a series of open-ended conversations that continue throughout childhood and on into adulthood. We're preparing our kids for a world that may not always radically accept them. Our children are seeing Black men, women, and children being killed, sometimes for no reason at all. They saw a man for 8.5 minutes in their living room on TV, having his life taken away from him by a knee on his neck. They've seen a young man who was jogging in a neighborhood, and some of the neighbors chased him out and shot him as he was running away from them. We have to prepare our children for this type of world. And so we continue to have talks with them. And these talks are meant to empower Black children, not to scare them, but to prepare them, to get them to believe in themselves and not to internalize what other people or who other people think that they are. We have to let these kids know that they do have a future despite all the violence and senseless killings that are around them. Now, research, you go to the next one, Kathleen. Research shows that the Black teenage boys and men are stopped more frequently for minor infractions or for doing nothing at all while they're driving. We have a saying called DWB, driving while Black. Black men and Black boys may be approached just if they're standing around doing nothing. They may be approached by somebody. Somebody might call the police because they're fearful of what these folks are out here doing. Therefore, part of this talk that we constantly ingrain in our kids is that we advise our kids to prepare for these types of situations where they might be completely surprised and shocked that a policeman or somebody in authority approaches them for doing nothing. We advise them to be compliant, to be respectful. Yes, sir. No, sir. Don't argue. We want them, and in this way, we are hopeful that our kids will not be harmed. I remember about 2 months ago, I was driving in a small town, and I was going the speed limit, which was 25, and a policeman was following me. And I said, okay, I'm okay, nothing to worry about. But then he put his lights on and pulled me over. And he came up to me on my driver's side, and he asked for my title and all that kind of stuff. And this is, when I was stopped, I was very fearful. I was very fearful, being a grown African-American woman. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I did not move them. He asked me for my driver's license and for my insurance cards. This is one thing that I need to add to the talk. Never keep your insurance cards on your telephone. So you have to reach into your purse and get your telephone out to show your insurance cards. But when I told him that, I said, this is where my insurance card is it okay if I put my hand into my purse and get my telephone out so I can show it to you? And he said, yes. But I turned to the passenger side. There was another policeman there with a light shining in my window, and he had his hand on his gun. The reason why they stopped me was because my tags were expired by 2 months. He was very nice. He did not give me a ticket. He just simply gave me a warning. But after he left, I was so shaken just from that interaction. And they were very polite. But I was shaken because I didn't know what the result would be. And I cried. I cried for myself. I cried for all of the other Black women, children, men who are going to be in the same position, and the same result may not occur. We live in a predominantly white neighborhood. And this first one, a little bit more of a talk, it says clothing, don't wear hoods. Trayvon Martin, he was hoodie with his Skittle hand, with earbuds on. He had a hoodie on. He was killed that evening. He was followed. When I was riding my bicycle home to my house in my predominantly white neighborhood, my white neighbor, who I love dearly, saw me coming on my bicycle, and I had on a hoodie. I also had a cap on underneath that hood, and she could not tell who I was. It was very obvious because she almost ran into her house. She had about 15, 16 steps to go, but she literally ran into her house because she was fearful of what she saw coming, who in actuality was her neighbor. We teach our kids not to put their hands in their pockets. We teach our kids, tell our kids that they will be followed in stores. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when they'll be followed. We tell them, don't pick up anything unless you're going to buy that thing. And always get a receipt and a bag. I'm amazed at the number of clerks who ask me, do I want a bag? Yes, I always want a bag. Also, I guess it's the fear of just always knowing that because of the color of your skin, you be thought of as suspect. My husband, he has weird hours. He likes to stay up most of the night, and so the time he goes for his walk in our neighborhood is about 11 p.m. at night. This particular night, he had a friend with him. So there was 2 Black men walking around our area in a suburb, predominantly white suburb. They're walking at 11 p.m. I told them, please don't go. It's not safe for you to go out there. Somebody may call the police on you. Somebody may not think you belong in this neighborhood. They went anyhow. They did take their telephone. And luckily they did arrive back safely. My son, who is 32, he has a 130-pound dog, a Mastiff Irish Wolfhound. He likes to walk that dog, who is perfectly trained with no leash. And he was walking, he came to visit us. He lives in Cleveland. He came to visit us. I was going to take his dog for a walk. I said, Robbie, you need to put that dog onto a leash. And he said, the dog's fine. I said, Robbie, you're in this neighborhood. You need to put the dog on a leash so nobody will have any reason at all to call the police or call somebody on you. My son, 32-year-old, he also is dating a white woman. They've been together for about 6 months. I'm always afraid for them. Whenever they go out, I'm always afraid because of the fact that some people might think that is not his place. That is not his place to be able to touch a white woman in public, to show any type of public affection, and just to be with that woman. They go camping all over in small places. I always talk about hotels that they stay in, but to be honest with you, it doesn't really make any difference where they are, because he could be attacked at any time just because some people may feel he does not belong with that white woman. Kathleen had mentioned Pope Paul III and how he condemned dehumanization of people just because of the color of their skin or the way they look. He condemned this behavior in the year 1535, yet it still exists today. There's an unconscious dehumanization of Black people. A lot of research in this area. Their research shows that police perceive Black boys as older than what they are, typically about 14 years older. We had, I believe he was 10-year-old child that had a toy gun in a park in Cleveland. He was killed within 3 seconds after the police arrived. Maybe he appeared much older to the police. Black boys and girls will be perceived as being guilty, whereas their white counterpart may not have that perception of guilt put upon them. They'll be perceived as troublemakers in the school system. They'll be perceived as less innocent than white children the same age. And where individuals are dehumanized, the social protections from violence, a lot of the times, some of the time, are removed or reduced, as we've seen in the killing of so many Black men and women. I'd like to look at just a few implications for practice. I'm just taking a couple from jobs I've had. As Kathleen said, I did work in adoptions, and I did participate in placing children, having Black children join their permanent homes with white families. And the white families who made me the most nervous were those who said that I'm colorblind. I'm not going to raise my child to be a Black child. Color doesn't make any difference. White families who adopt Black children need to be sure that they are also able to prepare the kids for the racist society in which these children will live. Just because they're adopted by a white family does not give them any special privilege. They're still going to be seen by the community and by our society as being Black. And so it's very important that when white families do adopt Black children, that they have a series of support in place. Supports like Black adult friends, Black children, so the kids can see people who look like them. They can see adults who look like them, so they can know that they can grow up to be a positive Black person. I also, as Kathleen said, am currently working in hospice. And I was working with a Black couple who lived in a suburb. And when the man was 48 years old, he was diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer. So I began working with him when he was 52 years old. And this man often left his home and wandered in the neighborhood. And he could be resistive when the wife tried to get him back into the home. So it continued to deteriorate into the point that she really wasn't able to get him back into the home by herself. And she sat there and cried in my arms saying, "What do I do? I can't call the police. I will not call the police because they may practice this dehumanization where they may think he's stronger, that he's more aggressive than perhaps what he really is. He may do some sudden movement that they may think he has a weapon." And so we sat there together and we thought about what would be the best plan as to how to get this person, this man, back into his home safely. And we came up with a series of friends who were able to commit to this woman that they would be available to her 24 hours a day. And of course, they took shifts in case this man did go out into the neighborhood, that they would come and they would be able to try and escort him back safely into the home. This man continued to deteriorate, and he was eventually placed in a secure unit, in a memory care unit, where he was safe, and he is now deceased. It's also important as you are counseling or working with Black adults or Black children to understand the burden that is carried by these individuals. They constantly have to prove themselves to be something other than what people assume they are. My parents always told me that for my job, I have to be twice as good as my white counterpart. My grades had to be very excellent to be able to do and compete in this society. So I'd like to introduce or just bring on the concept of white privilege. And this is a word that some people become defensive about because they say, well, I don't have any privilege. And I'd like to just share a video with you by John Amici, who is a psychologist. And it's just a 2.5-minute video, and he talks about white privilege and how he views that. Kathleen, are you working on getting the video up?
Yeah, can you see this video?
No, not yet.
Well, just listen. Here.
You may have even had this term used in a way that felt like an insult or an accusation. Others will have told you that it's all just made up to make white people feel bad, and none of this is right. Privilege is a hard concept for people to understand because normally when we talk of privilege, we imagine immediate, unearned riches and tangible benefits for anyone who has it. But white privilege, and indeed all privilege, is actually more about the absence of inconvenience, the absence of an impediment or challenge, and as such, when you have it, but when it's absent, it affects everything you do. There are lots of types of privilege out there. The privilege of being born into a wealthy family versus a poor family is kind of obvious. But then there's the privilege of being able-bodied versus having or acquiring a disability that most of us take for granted. I have 2 very close friends who are wheelchair users, and I'll be honest, when I first met them, I was completely ignorant about the everyday ways their lives are made harder through no fault of their own. Some of these ways are simply thoughtless, but some of them are just the way we live, just the way we build infrastructure, just the way everything works. That just makes their life harder than mine. That's just one of the ways that I'm privileged. And understanding that, embracing that, doesn't make me a bad person. But ignoring it raises the chance that my friends will be excluded in ways that are not obvious to me. And as their friend, I can't allow that. There's a good chance as a white person watching this, your life is already hard. Every day you have to overcome some difficulty or challenge just to get by, but you can still have white privilege. White privilege doesn't mean you haven't worked hard or you don't deserve the success you've had. It doesn't mean that your life isn't hard or that you've never suffered. It simply means that your skin color has not been the cause of your hardship or suffering. There is nothing but a benefit to understanding our own privileges, white and otherwise. It brings us closer to those who are different. It helps us be vigilant about the ways we treat others different from us. It helps us make a society that is fairer and more equal. Having white privilege doesn't make your life easy, but understanding it can help you realize why some people's lives are harder than they should.
Oops, sorry. Now I'm showing you what I'm teaching my grandchildren today. So, okay, so let me scoot back down here to where we belong. Oops, am I sharing my screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay, get back to this. So now, thanks, Rhonda. I particularly wanted Rhonda to share her own stories because I think they make a huge difference to us. It's not just words. In fact, it brought tears to my eyes. Because I don't suffer the same way. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about my personal experience before we talk about structural and institutional racism. We have a piece of property that has a house and it has 5 mobile home spaces that they ended up coming with this piece of property. And so we rented these spaces and the house out. The house became available, so people called, and I got a call from a gentleman, a really nice, fine gentleman. He is a pastor of a small church, and he and his family wanted to rent the house. We had a lovely discussion, and at the end of it, he said, "But by the way, in those mobile homes, I'd like your word that you will not rent one of them to a black family. I don't have these experiences. And when he said that, I was so shocked. And of course, I've lived with people in this community all the time, but that's something that I wouldn't have known if he hadn't said. So my response was to him, well, that's not anything you're ever going to have to worry about because I'm not going to rent to you. And he tried to say, oh no, I'm a nice person. And I said, I'm sorry, but I am not. I'm going to rent to whoever I think will be the best renters. And it will have nothing to do with race. And I am just totally appalled that that's your view. And this discussion is over. And that was it. But I wouldn't see it. Just like the video showed, I don't see that. It's invisible to me because I'm white. And that's what structural racism is, and it happens both within our communities and in our institutions. So institutional structural racism is the social, economic, educational, and political forces or policies that operate to foster discriminatory outcomes. That housing was a discriminatory outcome that he was looking for, or to give preference to members of one group over others. So it derives its genesis from the origins of race as a concept, and it happens everywhere. To me, it's kind of like COVID numbers. We know they're everywhere. Well, so is racism. So we see racism in housing, we see it in education and in the criminal justice system and in the child welfare system and now in COVID-19. So I just gave you one example of housing. I'm going to just quickly go through, but remember that there's more data in this PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you because we just don't have the time. So there's a study done in Texas in 2011, and they just took the data from almost 1 million secondary school children, all the school children in all the public schools in Texas. They took all the data and they merged that with data from the juvenile justice system. And their findings were striking. Again, just data. They were just looking at data, objective data. And they found that African American students more likely than students of other races to be disciplined during their 7th to 12th grade school years, particularly for discretionary code of conduct violations, while mandatory discipline was low and comparable. Well, let me say that in pure English here. That kids between 7th and 12th grade, in 12th grade, before their graduation, people there are violations of conduct. Some are discretionary and some are mandatory. So, for example, a mandatory one is if you bring a gun to school, you have a mandatory disciplinary action. No questions asked. But there's so many other ones that are discretionary. And they found that African American students were more likely than any other students to be disciplined because of these discretionary ones, not the mandatory ones. And the students with higher disciplinary actions also enter the juvenile justice system, and again, they're disproportionately African American. So let me show you here the percent with one or more disciplinary actions during that 7th to 12th grade. 3/4 of all African American children had at least one disciplinary action right there. That is just astonishing. And then let me take you over to this other one. Can you see the little cursor or not?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm pointing to out of school suspension. Here are the African Americans, 75% of them have a disciplinary action. And 26% of them, this is their first discretionary disciplinary action. 26% of those kids have an out of school suspension. They were suspended. Look at white kids here. Less than half of them have at least one, and which is surprising that how many have them. But look, only 10% of them are suspended out of school. That is a huge difference. Again, this is just discretionary code of conduct violations. All the same. You look over here and you can see cumulatively that only 23.9% had none, African Americans. But you look and see who has 11 plus disciplinary actions, 25% of African Americans, 18% of Hispanic, Latino, and less than 10% of white kids. And you can see that more than half of all white kids have not had any. So it's cumulative. So I'm going to go down here and again show that I'm going to try to do this quickly because I think you can see this, that right here, in contrast to students subject to discretionary actions, that in mandatory removal from school, that they really didn't, that it was pretty much the same. So I'm going to skip over. 1 in 5 African American students then are referred to the juvenile justice system. They have juvenile justice system contact. Whereas 1 in 10 white kids have juvenile justice system contact. So that is a huge, it's our pipeline from the education system into juvenile justice and then prison. So we know that the disciplinary actions are linked to juvenile justice contact. So students who had disciplinary actions, that 60% had a disciplinary action, and anyone who had a disciplinary action, almost a fourth of them then have juvenile justice contact, whereas students who don't have it, only 2% of them have juvenile justice contact. Now, this study is a fascinating one. I really suggest you all read it because it also shows some things with children with disabilities, children who have other kinds of disorders. They actually are impacted differently too, but I'm just showing you the African American. Let's talk about the child welfare system. The child welfare system right now is really being examined because of the racial disproportionality. So this is what we mean by racial disproportionality. Black or African American children make up 13.8% of the total child population. So that's a relatively small, whereas white kids are more than half. Then you look at the ones that percent of children identified as victims who actually come into the child welfare system, and 22% of those who are victims are African American versus 13% of the child population. And so this is a racial disproportionality index. So they're 1.6 times as likely to enter the child welfare system. They're 1.8 times as likely to go into foster care. So they're almost twice as likely to be raised in foster care. And we know that foster care is not great for kids. It's just not. And then we know that they're 1.7 times as likely to exit, and they are only 1.4 times to have public agency involvement. So I don't want to get into this. I have done 2-day workshops just on this line right here. But I do want to call your attention to one other factor. There are so many other things that are involved. For example, poverty is the greatest indicator of entry into the child welfare system. And we know that African American families, and particularly African American children, have much higher poverty rates too. All that doesn't excuse racism. In fact, it helps us to think more deeply about all the ingrained race, all the structural and institutional racism that we see. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to go over here to this COVID racial data tracker. So Black people are dying of COVID at 2.3 times the rate of white people. Now, I know we've heard our Surgeon General talk about there are a lot of different factors related to that. For example, predisposing health conditions that African Americans have at a higher rate than white people. But all of these things are so intricately tied together. They are all a part of this racist structural web. And we really have to be conscious about dismantling that web and looking at it. So here's some of the ways that we can look at it. We want to say, where is it in my agency? So we actually can assess our agency's racism. And we can look around, and what do we see? We want to be proactive because we want to assure racial equity. Okay, there's my typo. Sorry. And think about it. A lot of times you're in a workplace where it's not what you know or what you come here with, but it's who you know. And social capital is a really great thing. I've written about it in rural communities. It's wonderful, but it also can keep people. If you aren't friends with the people in power, if you're not, it actually is a deterrent or it's a barrier to getting ahead. So think about how racism is in your agency. So look at your hiring practices, look at promotions, administration. What are the power structures? Who is in power and why are they in power? And how can you have racial equity? Look at your clients from all vantage points at intake, service availability, delivery, client outcomes, fundraising, resources, decision making. Who makes the decisions? And finally, Rhonda's heard this many times when we work together, but we measure what is important. We value, we evaluate.
It's what we value. So this should be something that we take to heart and evaluate. Look at racial equity within our organization. So now I'm going to turn it back up. Who can help us with our own examination of conscience?
Yeah, so Kathleen's talked about at the agency level, and now we're going to look more at the individual level. One of the things that we are doing in our own lives, at our jobs, what are we doing to really promote racial justice? Or what are we doing to perhaps have that racial injustice occur around us and within our agencies? So the next 5 slides, I think, are a racial examination of conscience. And all of us here have implicit biases. And we may not actually know that we have those until we really watch our own behaviors and we really search deeply within ourselves. And so, like I said, the next 5 slides include these questions. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. The first one, do I interact with people who are different than me outside of work or school? And especially now in today's society where there is more divisiveness, it's really important to listen to other people, to see what their perceptions are, to learn from them, and to share your own perceptions so that they may learn from you. On the next page, have I ever asked someone about their heritage or ethnicity by asking, so what are you? Have I ever seen someone on the street and made a judgment based on how they dress, how their hair is styled, how they walk, how they speak? Have I ever participated in or laughed at jokes or comments that belittle or denigrate people who don't look like me or practice a different faith than me? And that's a particularly harmful one. And it's something that a lot of times, for example, I work in a small community, kind of a rural area. Kathleen wouldn't really call it rural, but I work around mostly white folks. And they do have lots of jokes. And sometimes I attempt to say something and attempt to say why I don't appreciate what they said. Sometimes I just simply ignore it. Happens quite a bit. Do I blame the victims who suffer poverty and or oppression for their plight? Next one, Kathleen. I'm sorry, go back. Do I try to come up with excuses for things I do or say that are perceived as racist or harmful by others? And so we really have to be aware of what we're saying, how we're saying it. Have I ever said I'm not racist, but do I always speak to others from different backgrounds with respectful tone and language? Do I automatically associate negative attributes to an entire group of people? Do I use dehumanizing language about others, referring to them as thugs, animals, or illegals? Those are just a few of the questions, and again, there's 5 pages of these questions. And I hope that you will be able to spend some time looking at these. And like I said, we've all done things, all of us have. We've all said things that maybe we regret after we said them. But I just hope that you'll look at these and maybe take 2 or 3 and really rate yourself and examine your own conscience. Let's see here. And then what can we as social workers do? So, first of all, we've only introduced this topic. You've probably heard other presentations on racism. You probably all have your own examples that perhaps you've witnessed yourselves. But I think that the first step of what we as social workers can do is to really recognize that structural racism exists. So that when we are talking with our clients, that we can have that in the back of our mind and see perhaps what has this person experienced based on structural racism. Kathleen mentioned advocacy for change in all areas of social work practice at all levels. There's tons of opportunities to get involved with the NASW, where you can work for racial justice. There's lots of different committees you can become involved in. We have to work to understand our biases. We may need to read books. There's lots of resources. I think Kathleen has a good here. We have to really work on this. It's something that, because it's so embedded in society, we may not see what those biases are, so we really have to work. It's only through understanding our own biases that we can enact the policies and procedures that do promote systemic racism. I'm going to give it back to Kathleen.
Okay, thanks, Rhonda. One of the ones that I really like in the examination of conscience that we just went over is we have to listen with different kinds of ears, and we have to look with different kinds of eyes. I have to work harder because I'm white and I haven't felt those same things. My children, I had a child pulled over by the police and actually had to put his hands behind his back because in the back seat was a toy gun. But it was a joke for my children because the policeman was a young guy and he was razzed for stopping the attorney, the person who, my husband at the time, actually represented the city of Nacogdoches in some of their issues. So, I mean, this poor young cop was really razzed for, frisking this young kid who had, was the son of the attorney. I don't know if my child had been Black, things would have turned out very, very differently. I really do believe. So I don't experience it. I have to work so much harder, and I have to listen, and I have to be available a space to listen to what happens to my colleagues. And it may be quiet, and I have to make that space available. And I have to take a conscious way of evaluating. So here are 2 resources. Open wide your hearts. And I did refer to this earlier, but if you click on it, there's so many resources that you can use in your parish, that you can use in all kinds of their handouts, a ton of beautiful resources. I wish we had the time to show them to you. And then also look at this background, your PDF. That's really helpful. I'd like to just show these 5 things. I think there are 5. We'll see on the next slide. But this comes from Open Wide Your Hearts, and that is the USTCB. Listen and know the stories of our brothers and sisters who have suffered from racism in history and in the present. Again, we have to listen and open our eyes and our hearts. We have to work to address both individual and systemic racism. It's so easy to believe, oh, no, it's not really everywhere, and we're good people, and we are good people, but we have to open our eyes. It can be individual. We sometimes don't recognize certain groups. It can be systemic. We have to open our eyes to this racism in employment, housing, wealth, education, criminal justice, and voting, all of these things. We have to think about what we do wherever we are. We have to make a commitment as people of faith to intentionally create those spaces of welcome and opportunity. In our families, we have to think about who we socialize with, who we learn from at school or work. How can we learn more about other cultures, about other people's experiences? We have to make those available consciously. And as individuals and communities of faith, we have to examine our conscience. Where have I not lived is an example of Christ's love. So that is from Open Heart Hearts. I know we have a little bit of time, but I would like to keep it open for questions. But I'm going to end, or we're going to end with Pope Francis's prayer for world peace and living together. So if you would just pray with me, your speakers aren't open, but if you would pray it out loud where you are, or even silently, let's pray what Pope Francis prayed. In the name of God, who has created all human beings equal in rights, duties, and who has called them to live together as brothers and sisters to heal the earth and make known the values of goodness and love. In the name of innocent human life that God has forbidden kill, affirming that whoever kills a person is like one who kills all of humanity, and whoever saves a person's life is like one who saves the whole of humanity. In the name of the poor, the destitute, the marginalized, and those most in need, whom God has commanded us to help as a duty required of all persons, especially the wealthy and those of needs. In the name of orphans, widows, refugees, and those exiled. I'm not going to go through all of it, but in the name of peoples who have lost their security, in the name of human fraternity, in the name of fraternity, torn apart by policies of extremism and division, in the name of freedom that God has given to all human beings, creating them free and setting them apart by this gift, in the name of justice and mercy, the foundations of prosperity and the cornerstones of faith, in the name of persons of goodwill present in every part of the world, in the name of God and everything stated thus far, we declare the adoption of a culture of dialogue as a path, mutual cooperation as a code of conduct, and reciprocal understanding as a method and standard. We're all in this together. Amen. And I do want to reiterate what Bishop Senior said. This is community. This is who we are. So we have also several references for you. Can we open it up to questions? Are there any questions in the chat? If not, I just want to tell you all, it's been a real honor for us to be able to talk about this together. I so appreciate Rhonda sharing her experiences and her thoughts and her wisdom as she always does. Thank you so much, boss. You're great. I love you, really.
Thank you so much for having me to be able to share this with you. And thank you all of you for listening. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to have them.
So Kathleen and Rhonda, this was powerful and gives me a sense that all these years of collaboration have actually primed you for such a time as this. Yes. So while you were speaking, I had a text from the president of Catholic Charities of Arlington, the Arlington Diocese, which is a fabulous Catholic Charities, and said to him in response, you really need to have this duo give this presentation for the Catholic Charities of Arlington. So like it or not, you two may become an item. And this is a time when you can speak truth and be light and soul into a culture that desperately needs it. And so thank you very much. We're all indebted to you, really. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'd be glad to keep on working together.
Well, thank you, Kathleen and Rhonda, and thank you, Beverly. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back with our next presentation. Okay? Great. Thank you, everyone. Yes, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you, Kathleen, that when you came back and you did something to click on that allowed me to show my screen. I wasn't allowed to do it. So when your next presenters come, that may be the key to helping people to show their screen. That's all I was saying. Yeah, I didn't have any of the options until something got turned differently.
Well, I apologize for that, and I appreciate the feedback, so.
I'm going to say this publicly. I already wrote an email to both Kathleen and to Melanie. What courage to take on the enormous technological feat. So I think you all are doing a wonderful job. I'm just trying to help you with the next presenter. So really, what a wonderful job you're doing with this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Technology times.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being a part of this and such a wonderful presentation and such a much needed time also. So, okay, so we're going to take now a couple minutes break. Maybe we'll get some more coffee, wake up, and we'll be right back. Thank you.